Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Canadian Football Central, CFL content for the fans, by the fans, and I am happy here. We are finally doing our video on the Edmonton Elks. This is the mid-season report, and we have Scout from the Elks Herd on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, how's it going, boys? Carter, Rick, always thrilled to see you guys, especially thrilled to be on your show today. This is awesome.
Oh, this is gonna be great. We had a long conversation about all sorts of nonsense before we got in here, and I promise that it will not get any more intelligent. It will get dumber. So we're gonna get right into it. So first of all, overall, Scout, how do you feel about the Edmonton Elks right now in their current standing and the current status of the team? All that shit.
Hope. I feel hope for the first time this season. I mean, really, you start the season 0-7. You lose some hope pretty quick, especially when you spend, almost $500,000 on a starting quarterback that cannot seem to find the win. So at this point with Trey Ford, yeah, I feel hope. And especially for this weekend against the BC Lions, right? This past game, man, to see Javon Leake score 3 touchdowns.
Oh my goodness, 169 rushing yards. That is ridiculous.
To become the fastest running back in pro football.
Yeah.
It was like a movie, right? And of course, it was straightforward that O-line just seems to work with him. So, and it sucks because MBT, you feel for the guy, he came in to do a job, but unfortunately, this O-line just does not seem to play very consistently, or at least give MBT that proper opportunity. Is Trey Ford move his pocket, man?
Well, and that's the thing I find very interesting is because this season with the Edmonton Elks seems like very similar to last season in a sense, with a few tweaks in the sense of that is that with both you have situations where Trey Ford isn't always doesn't come out of the gates and this is the number one guy. This is absolutely what we're doing. This is the plan. It seems like it's been a situation of someone else being there and then it kind of falling apart. And then we bring Trey Ford in and it's like, okay, well now there's some hope on this team. Maybe we're going to get somewhere. Now, obviously the Elks, unfortunately, were not able to get themselves into a playoff spot last year, even with a bit of late season success. But it's one of those things where, again, it's like, there's no saying they can't this season. Actually, when we had Coach Phil on, for the Saskatchewan video, he actually made the prediction that Edmonton would actually figure it out and get it done and get themselves into a playoff spot, which, I mean, this is no offense to you. It's a little bit of a bold take considering the situation right now. And I would say that for anyone 1-7, even if it was my beloved Blue Bombers, and they have problems of their own, trust me. So...
Oh, at some point, hey, those Winnipeg Blue Bombers were 0 with us, okay? It was 0-4, I remember.
There you go.
Friend, don't know if you know Joe Pritchard of Rouge, White, and Blue podcast, but he came on to our show, the Elks Call, and we talked about that scenario when the Blue Bombers were there. But right after that, the Blue Bombers managed to find some wins, get a little bit of a rebound. Still in the basement a bit, but they're chugging along. You knew that you couldn't hold Zach Laros and company down forever, right?
Well, and that was the thing I always felt. I don't want to spend too much time on Winnipeg because we're talking about Elks today, but with Winnipeg, it was always more of like a lot of people. It was always like all around Winnipeg is Collaros washed? Is Collaros washed? Is Collaros washed? And I'd be like, yeah, he's making a few mistakes that he wasn't making before, but it's like the amount of times that he was in the red zone, threw to a receiver in the end zone, and it would straight up hit him right in the chest and go land on the ground, or hit the hands, land on the ground, or it would be the guy's right about to get it and just get picked off because our guys aren't running the routes. I'm not going to lie, I was more of the mindset that I was getting frustrated with our receivers. And then last game, what do you know? We stopped dropping the ball. Dembski, after 2 really bad drops, just gets on top of it. So it just shows how that can all turn around. But man, I mean, I was not able to see all of the Elks Riders game, which I really wish. I was at a wedding, so I wasn't able to. But I checked the highlights, and my gosh, the absolute magic coming from Javon Leake and Trey Ford. And Trey Ford's one of those things where right now, with an O-line that has struggled, he has made the most out of it in his opportunity that he's gotten. And it's one of those things where it's like, if they got a really solid O-line in front of him, oh my God. Like,
well, and Carter, like that's the thing, right? Is when you have Trey Ford out there, it changes the other team's defense. The other team's
yeah.
defense needs to keep an eye on Trey Ford. That's why they put
All the film on McLeod Bethel Thompson means nothing at that point. Like,
out the window. Now, what happens in 2 to 3 games when there's a lot of film on Trey Ford and formations and what they're doing with that? Sure, it's going to be harder for Trey Ford to do that. However, you take a look at how much it opens up the field, even for Javon Leake. It's harder to throw higher number pressures when you have two running backs basically going opposite directions or going in different directions. They open up those running lanes, and the offense can work a little. The offensive
and that's
line
good.
Work.
And that's good because, I mean, like, going into the season with all the questions around the Elks, the one thing that there was no questions about was how much receiver talent they had. I mean, you look at that roster. Oh my gosh, the names they have on there, like you'd like. It's one of those things where it's like, man, if they could figure out how to put this all together, they seriously, we could be talking about the number one receiving core in the CFL in terms of pure, like, on paper talent. It's there. There's no question. And so one of the things that's really, really important when you have all that receiver talent is also having running back talent. Because the problem is that if you're so heavy on either your running backs, on your running game, or your passing game, it makes you so much more predictable. And it means that your defense can kind of cheat a little bit in the sense of knowing what those plays are going to be. So always keeping the defense guessing is crucial. Now, even with all that talent, they still have to stop it. Like, it doesn't mean that they don't have to stop it, but having that question of are they running, are they rushing, are they passing is always going to be an important factor.
Well, and then the other thing with Javon Leake, too, that people aren't really talking about enough is that Kevin Brown and Javon Leake have different styles, and Javon Leake's play style at running back, I just compared him to Le'Veon Bell, where Le'Veon Bell kind of did that push off the backs, wait for the hole, sees the hole, goes for it. Whereas Kevin Brown is a head down, CJ Gable type. Rick, you should know a little bit about CJ Gable. He was fantastic at throwing a shoulder down and just running through guys. And Kevin Brown kind of has that style, but in a smaller but mighty package. Whereas Javon Leake, he gets that stutter step in there. He gets that little bit of hesitation, that split second that opens up a new window, and he sees it and he's off.
Yeah, so, and that's kind of an underrated skill. I'll let you get into it, Rick, in 1 second. Just in terms of that patience to just, you see the hole opening up, give it like just literally split second, and then pounce on it. And so that's really, really important skill. Here, Rick, you had something.
So I have a question for you. Given everything that you've seen this year between the offense and defense, the interesting trade that I seen in the offseason when Curly Gittens went from Toronto to Edmonton, and how well Curly's doing well in Edmonton and how well Jake Ceresna is doing in Toronto. Do you still make that trade?
See, I have a really big soft spot for Jake Ceresna. Jake Ceresna is a fantastic guy on and off turf. So I don't think I ever really want to see Jake Ceresna go. Also, taking a look at the defensive line and how the defensive line could use some help. I mean, even Robert Temdici technically got released from the team. He didn't really make the team past 4 or 5 games, right? So it's interesting. I personally would not make that trade because I prefer Jake Ceresna on the line. Like we just said, you take a look at the wide receivers for this team, you never worry about the wide receiver talent there. So and that was before Curly Gittens Jr. came on board.
That's true.
Like they filled out this wide receiver corps well. Gavin Cobb is technically getting underutilized compared to what he was last year. So I personally wouldn't have liked it. However, the selling feature on this, the selling point is the fact that MBT had instant chemistry. Yeah. So that gave you hope that, yes, you're going to see a better offensive product. And for the most part, we did.
Yeah. And one thing I will say about that is that like with the Edmonton Elks, one thing that I've noticed that they've done going into this season is that they've kind of actually like it was a confusing strategy for me. It almost seems like they doubled down on what they had in the sense of that they bring in Curly Gittens Jr. to add to a receiving core that I didn't feel needed to be added to. We $500,000 to a quarterback when I'd argue the guy you got is worthy of a starting spot after what I'd seen from him last year. And so it kind of puzzled me a little bit just in the sense of that I was unsure about the defense that the Elks had, not because necessarily that they were particularly bad, but because they're a defense that I'm not as knowledgeable on, just being completely frank. And so it was one of those things where I'm like, okay, no real big names around here that at least that I'm familiar with. And so now we had Coach Phil on, and he very much said that this is an Elks defense that we are going to be scary, that is going to be scary in these next few years. And so I'm definitely going to be keeping more of an eye on it than I have before. But it was
but you make a really good point there. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but you make a really good point. It's a really young defense, right?
Yeah, it is. And so that was one of those things where that's definitely a benefit, but it was I was really thinking like the Elks surely like they're probably going to grab some sort of veteran presence within that to put somewhere in there. Where that's going to be? No, I actually thought that a guy that Edmonton would actually go after is when I heard that Jonathan Moxey would not be retaining with the Stampeders. I actually thought this is the Elks move. This is where they move in, they grab a guy from just right across the pond, literally over there in Calgary, bring him in, and you have that veteran presence. And they haven't had him in there. However, this is a defense that has a lot of promise. I think they just need to see kind of the full extent of that. And so sometimes bringing in those veterans helps. I was more so just confused in the sense of the moves that they did do, in the sense of not that they were bad moves. I mean, bringing in McLeod Bethel-Thompson and Curly Gittens Jr. isn't going to make your team worse. I was just kind of like, there's only so much money to go around, and this is where it's going. I was just a little bit confused in that regard.
Well, and fans had been crying and begging for offensive line help, defensive line help, especially because Jake Ceresna went one way, and it was speculated that Sean Oakman was coming to Edmonton. But then it didn't happen for 3 to 4 games. So you're wondering, like, what the heck is going on?
I wanted him in Winnipeg. I was like, we're having guys drop left, right, and center. We could use him. Now, I will say I'm very happy with Devin Adams. He's played very, very well. But I was worried about all this injury trouble. And so I was like, Sean Oakman, that'd be a great guy. And then I saw Edmonton sign. I'm like, damn it.
Sean Oakman, I mean, we had been hoping, and especially because you need to not replace, but you need to put somebody in the spot of Jake Ceresna. You needed
it's a hole in the lineup. You got to fill the hole.
Exactly. Now, the benefit, the one bonus about this, yes, they have Jamin Pelly, who's only returning for his second year, I believe.
Yep.
Sure, you have some players there that can now kind of help out. You lost AC Leonard from last season. AC Leonard was absolutely huge on that line.
Yeah.
So, you lose 2 to 3 really good pieces. Suddenly, you're missing those veteran pieces to glue the rookies together. They went ahead and they got Armando Sewell at D-line coach, and that is probably a move that's going to save this team for the season at least.
I see. So you would say that that's like probably that move at coaching is like the biggest change that they've had defensively, you'd say?
Defensively, I would say that's the biggest positive move besides Sean Oakman, obviously getting more. In my opinion, they need to make a trade or two to beef up both lines. Like, I mean, 1 to 2 trades per line. The defense, it has bigger problems than the D-line, I'll say that. The linebacker corps, besides Niles Morgan, most linebackers are looking invisible out there. You're seeing a lot of those plays, even go right through the secondary. Like, it's really painful to see some of the defensive plays. And just like we talked about on the latest episode of the Elks Call, you're letting the other team get 31 in. You have to now outscore that 31. Luckily the Edmonton Elks got like a 42 or whatever. We ended up getting a pretty sizable win, but you can't depend on that all the time. That's not sustainable.
No, absolutely. And so it's funny. One of the things that me and Rick had written down on, and I want to get into this just in the sense of that and this is just kind of regarding maybe some of the guys who've kind of maybe shocked a little bit, where we weren't expecting much, but we got a lot more out of them, or guys that disappointed who've kind of fallen on the other side of it. Now, obviously, in the team as a whole, like I can talk about my Bombers and say this is disappointing. I'm sure Rick can talk about his Ticats and say that this has been a disappointing start. Not for Bo Levi Mitchell, but for the team as a whole. With the Elks, I'm not like, I mean, it's disappointing going 0-7, but I also, it's like, is it extremely unexpected? Like maybe 0-7 is a bit much, but I mean, I didn't have exactly high expectations. I don't mean that in any offense.
No, but here in Edmonton, there was a lot of expectation, especially when you go through the season that you did last year and the season before and the
That's
season
true.
before.
Just expectation
Right?
that it's better than that. Yeah.
Yeah, but your expectation shouldn't be, oh, we're going to get 1 to 2 home wins in a season. I think like that was probably one of the most painful stretches to ever go through as a fan, just because you never knew when it was going to end. And now that home streak BS is over, and now that we're at the
Yeah,
point
that
where
was that was the monkey on the back. Like
exactly. And then the floodgates opened. They started to get wins. Trey Ford started to get figured out. The offense started to get figured out. The wins kind of came up and then they came down, and they had that little bit of a playoff chance. Like they had the hopes. There was a little bit of a drive at the end of the season with like 3 or 4 wins, right? So it's you go from that. You have Trey Ford. You know your starting quarterback, and then all of a sudden you get MBT, and it's supposedly a massive upgrade. And then you bring in Curly Gittens Jr. and lose one of your major defensive pieces. So you know, and you don't know what goes on in the mind of Chris Jones when he's making these moves. But everything.
I'd argue you don't know what happens in the mind of Chris Jones at all, anytime. not just when he's making the moves.
Chris Jones knows what goes on in the mind of Chris Jones. Okay, yeah, but
that's true.
It was just one of those scenarios where you were sold a better team, and really, to be honest, the team is much improved over this time last year. And that's no slight on Taylor Cornelius. Like MBT is clearly a better quarterback than Taylor Cornelius. But when MBT is scrambling like Taylor Cornelius was, well, that once again shows that the problems are on the O-line. The problems are with other pieces of this team, right? So it's, yes, the expectations were there. At the same time, you sure wished that this wasn't happening. Now, when you look at the schedule and you open it up, well, you got Saskatchewan game 1. Oh, just like last year. You have to win this game. Because if you do not win game 1 on the Edmonton Elks schedule, games 2, 3, and 4 are all pretty much scheduled losses.
That was actually one of the things we mentioned when we were doing our first previews of the season, was that Edmonton needed to win early because their schedule was only going to get a lot worse there. And so that was kind of our 2 cents there. Now, one thing I will say is that even though there have been some disappointments through the season, there have been some guys, but there have been some guys who have also shined, though. And in my opinion, one guy that has shined is he's in his 5th season in the CFL. And I just from what I'd seen, I was pretty happy with his performance. Herjay Mayala, receiver for the Edmonton Elks. As I mean, if we're talking prior seasons, he had capped his yards, receiving yards with 562. He got that in his first year with Calgary. And then he got that in a total of 12 games. In just 7 games, so just barely over half that, he's already hit 337. He's got 4 touchdowns. He has a career high 5 in his first season. So just barely over half the number of games. He already almost has basically what he had gotten then. So it looks like we're getting a career year out of Herjay Mayala. And just it's not even just how many yards he's gotten and how many catches he's gotten. So far he's got 31 reception, 337 yards, 4 touchdowns for an average of 10.9. It's also the scenarios and that he's made these catches. He's made some pretty difficult catches out of those 31. And that's the thing that's really, really stuck out to me, is that the amount of times where I've seen the Elks kind of stuck on second down, second and long, and they got to get something done, and they throw one in seemingly an impossible spot, and he gets his hands on it, and he holds onto that ball, stays down, and grabs the Elks the first down, has really helped them just move down the field, at least in my opinion, from what I've seen.
Oh, totally. He's been a very welcome addition, and I think what people also need to remember here is that Mayala was brought in Herjay Mayala was brought in as more of an insurance policy against Curly Gittens Jr., who started the season potentially injured. I believe the preseason he was going. He was injured in the preseason. Was actually injured in the off season. So
Yeah.
nobody was really sure if he was going to be available for the first regular season game.
Yep.
Enter Herjay Mayala, and holy cow, has he ever made an impact already? I mean, I'm even selecting him in fantasy simply because he can put up the numbers on any given night. But you look at the Elks receiving core as a whole, Dylan Mitchell was a hot target for MBT to start the season. That kind of died off. Now you're seeing, Gino Lewis getting more catches than he was with MBT. Now he's seeing even more with Ford. So, but getting back to specific individual performance, yeah, Herjay Mayala has been huge this season, and he's going to be continuing probably that campaign, right? He's going to be on track for some even bigger numbers. Now, I would say that we may see a bit of a drop off because of how much Gino and some of the other wide receivers are getting back to the mix.
So my question is, now that we're on receivers, for what you are paying Gino, that 300,000 rumored that you guys are paying him, do you think, from with what you saw in Montreal, do you think his in the year and a half that he's been on Edmonton, that it's kind of like gone like on a downward slope, kind of? Now he's just like coming back up. Because me personally, if there's going to be a disappointment for what you're paying him, that would have been mine.
Well, Rick, I mean, that's a really good question. It's not that Eugene Lewis, like, first off, let's just throw down the hammer right now.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be paying wide receivers $300,000. Let's put it that way. 300.
No.
Whatever,
I mean,
right?
Especially since we have to remember, it's been like what, like 4 years maybe since Lucky Whitehead signed that new league record $200,000 contract in BC. Now, I'm no economist. I am no expert on inflation. I have a strange feeling that 200,000 about 4 years ago is not 300,000 now.
No, and what most likely happened was there was a bidding war.
Yep.
You have multiple teams that were going in on Gino. Gino went through his options, and it's kind of weird. It's kind of like playing for the Maple Leafs. They'll never get a Stanley Cup. That's the big joke. You can go play for the Maple Leafs and bring glory back, because in the end, that's kind of like...
Didn't know the Edmonton Elks had Kyle Dubas working for them. I didn't realize that he was employed under Elks management.
Nice. I see what you did there.
Got to sign someone to a 10-year deal for $10 million or whatever it is.
You take off the mask on Chris Jones and it's Kyle Dubas. No,
yeah.
Chris Jones.
I don't know which one's scarier.
Hey, you know what? And it sucks because Chris Jones was semi-successful in Saskatchewan and the ball was rolling before he ended up leaving or whatever ended up happening there, right? Everybody was hoping to see that happen in Edmonton, but then after the second year of having such dismal performance, you kind of felt like, obviously year 3 is the make or break. Like, this was always going to be a make or break year for Chris Jones. So, yeah, getting Gino Lewis on a $300,000 contract, sure, wasn't necessarily ideal, but more than likely you had a bidding war more than likely. And then the other thing too is Gino Lewis took a fair chunk of money, also understanding that this team is in rebuild mode, knowing that like that's a trade-off. You're going to take more money to be potentially not competitive for a year or two, but at the end of the second year, or even at the beginning of the second year, you sure hope there was a lot more progress than what we currently have right now.
Yeah. No, because I mean, you'd love at that point if you're Gino Lewis and you're getting this, you're like, listen, I'm taking this big payday. I'm going to a franchise that currently is in rebuild mode, that isn't in a contender spot. Hopefully I'm able to go there. I'll make good money doing it. And hopefully maybe with some help, we can get the ball rolling here. And then at that point, the idea is that then you sign the extension where maybe you take a little bit of a cut at that point as you're hoping to then really fill the roster and have a team you can do something with. And so I don't think the Edmonton Elks needed necessarily greatness this year, but they needed a spark. And it's good they're getting a spark now. After 0-7 though, that's the punchline. That's the kicker. And, with you guys. So like overall, now one thing I will say is, and I want to ask, as a Bomber fan, I'm very interested in this, is that one guy that I really liked in Winnipeg was short yardage quarterback Dakota Prukop. I thought he was fantastic in Winnipeg. He seemingly got it every time. He like, I can't even think of a single time he actually missed it. And he had gotten always, like, most of the time he only needed one. He got 2 or 3 or something of that. And even one time we went to go in short yardage. We faked short yardage. Dakota Prukop made about 2 steps backward and threw the best throw of his life and got a touchdown on it. I remember being at that game. It was a crazy ballsy move by Buck Pierce to do that. Couldn't believe that Buck Pierce, of all coach, thought of that. But it's one of those things. How would you say you feel like Dakota Prukop is done as a short yardage quarterback in Edmonton?
Well, let's just go ahead and compare, let's say, Winnipeg last year to Winnipeg this year. You take a look at, let's say, you take a look at Zach Collaros, and you take a look at how he struggled this year. Well, what's a big difference between last year and this? Yoshi Hardrick is gone. Yeah. Right? You take a look at that offensive line, and by losing 1 or 2 pieces on that offensive line, suddenly the pocket looks a lot different. So the same goes for your short yardage attempts.
Yeah.
Our offensive line is not good at short yardage, and it certainly wasn't last year. It doesn't just miraculously do this 180.
I think I'm starting to realize how important that O-line was on that short yardage. Like,
it's crazy. No, seriously, like Dakota Prukop, fantastic short yardage quarterback. And really, most quarterbacks, tall quarterbacks, all sorts of quarterbacks can be good at the short yardage attempts, but it's that extra push. It's the one extra step and the one extra
you got to play
push.
as a unit. Like we had it's funny, we're releasing these like I think we've recorded this is like our 3rd one we're doing today, Rick, but we're releasing these day by day. And so one that we had done earlier today, just recording, one of the things that was mentioned, I can't remember who exactly mentioned it. It might have been Shane when we were doing the Ottawa one, is about how it is so important that to have that offensive line as a unit. You are only as strong as your weakest guy. You can have the 4 best linemen in the world, but if your 5th one sucks, it's going to hurt you, and it's going to hurt you bad. And so that was like, if like, just going back to what you were saying about Winnipeg, the big thing about Winnipeg is that there's been 2 changes on the offensive lineman. We lost Hardrick, and then we lost Jeff Gray. Now with Jeff Gray, we lost, and we got Liam Dobson going in there. I don't think that's been a loss at all. 1st round draft pick from Texas State, just an absolute, just complete monster truck in as an offensive lineman. But the big difference for Winnipeg has been that Pat Neufeld and Chris Kolinkowski have very much regressed. And so that has been the killer thing for them. Although thankfully Strevler is just so damn good at a short yardage quarterback, it doesn't even really matter much for him.
Well, and Strevler is just a different breed altogether, right? And
it's what happens when you have a running back that becomes a quarterback, you know? Like,
exactly. But we also have to remember, too, Prukop has USFL experience. I was watching him play down south there in the spring league. So it's like, you know, Prukop is a performer. He can do it. He has the stuff. And I'm pretty sure this is his 2nd stint in Edmonton. We've already watched him in Edmonton previously. I want to say 2019.
What's
2019.
Because I'm looking at his seasons here. I see that he was in Toronto from 2017 to 2019. And he's in Winnipeg from 2022 to 2024. Or 2022 to 2023, sorry. Is there a stint that he was in Edmonton that just the CFL? Oh, yes, he was. Yes, he was in 2021. He was
2021. There you go.
He doesn't have. What the hell? They have him listed on defense as well.
No, he was definitely, well, maybe for
they have him listed on defense for some sort of stuff. So he might have done some special teams or something like that. Okay. But here, yeah, if I go to passing and if I go to rushing, here we go. This is where where I see all of his stats. Yeah, I was looking at the top and I'm like, why is it not showing it? But so I think this is just his, like, I'm assuming special teams or whatever the hell he's on. But it's strange. I don't know why he's defensive stats. What the hell is everyone doing? But I see here passing and rushing that he had some a stint in 2021. You're right. Sorry, I was confused.
So like, and even when he was here in 2021, he was a great short yardage quarterback, and then we saw him off into the wind, right? So it's like, it's great to see him back. It's great that he's familiar, and he should be performing. It just, the team hasn't hit that point yet. I don't see why they can't, though, by the end of the season, all depending on what happens here. But they still need time to gel. This offensive line could use another guy or two, personnel change or two.
Yep.
I'm not going to go ahead and single anybody out on that O-line, but bottom line, it's still porous. They are getting better, and it is better under Trey Ford. And like we just saw with this last game, the offensive line can create the gaps. It can make the plays. Inconsistency with this team is freaking crazy. This team is not the same. It is Jekyll and Hyde between two games, right? And sometimes the results are the same, lost by 3 points or lost by less than a score or whatever. But the offensive line can look good in certain scenarios. We'll see what happens with this weekend against BC.
And it's funny that you mentioned that with the offensive line, because even with us, you bring in two people, one's a rookie and one's a non-rookie. We have the same offensive line as last year, and yet Bo Levi Mitchell's one of the quarterbacks that has been sacked the fewest compared to last year.
Yep, no, it's true.
No, credit to Hamilton. I mean, Bo Levi, I think, is one of the league leaders right now. He's in the top 2 or top 3 for passing yards.
He's number 1.
He's leading in passing and touchdowns.
There you go. Number exactly. 1. So that goes to show, right? It's when you're bringing in MBT, when you're bringing in a non-mobile quarterback, you build a freaking line for him and you make sure that pocket is good. So, Hamilton has done a fantastic job of protecting Bo Levi Mitchell and giving him time in that pocket, especially after last year. Scott Milanovic, best head coach to never coach a game here in Edmonton.
It's funny. Rick knows what I'm doing. It's Scott Milanovic, the first overall draft pick in the 2001 XFL draft. Team Extreme! The LA Extreme have selected Scott Milanovic. I'm sorry. It's the great. It's. If you want to talk about a fun fact, it is the most fun of fun facts.
Oh, so good. And Edmonton Elks legend, right? Double E legend. I don't even think they were called the Elks at that point. I think they were actually called the Edmonton football team. So
there you go. So yeah, moving away from fun facts about football coaches that played in really ridiculous leagues, which did give us the Skycam. Fair enough. They gave us the Skycam. So not everything from 2001 XFL was a waste. However, if we're moving away towards stuff that we should be talking about, overall, like, I'm trying to think here, like, so Elks, if we look at their schedule kind of moving forward and where this team can go, it's important to see kind of the matchups that they have, just because, especially defense, offense, especially defense, film is such a big thing. So, looking at, your upcoming opponents, if we're looking at this week here, you guys on Sunday will be playing BC. Now, one critical thing to note for this game, Vernon Adams Jr. is out. He is not in.
Oh.
So this is both good news and bad news in the sense that Vernon Adams Jr. very much bona fide starter. It also means that you have almost no film on Jake Dolegala besides the little bit he played at the end of that game against Winnipeg. But you can use at least some of the Vernon Adams Jr.'s clips to at least, get an idea of what the routes are and what they're running as far as an offense goes. And the following week, you guys play Hamilton in Hamilton. Then afterwards, you guys will play Montreal. And then after that, you guys will play Calgary. And that will be Labor Day. So that'll be your guys' Battle of Alberta.
Yeah.
And then after that, you guys have a home with Winnipeg.
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So how do you kind of feel about the Elks moving into all that?
It's good because I've also recently just talked about this as well. So yeah, you have that game against BC this weekend. That's a winnable game. Okay. Then you have Hamilton in Hamilton, which Trey Ford likes playing in Hamilton. That's a winnable game. Then you have Montreal and then Calgary. So the Edmonton Elks have an opportunity to be 4-7. I think realistically, 4-7 is not crazy.
Yeah.
They can win this game against BC. They can win in Hamilton.
Well, especially since BC's defense right now looks like they're they're in trouble. I have serious questions about this BC defense, and I mean their offense put up nothing last week, and so now there's a ton of questions about this BC offense, and so with Edmonton, problems, right? and I mean if we look at Edmonton, let's look at their game against Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan going into that had been one of the best teams defensively in the league, and Edmonton put up 42 points on them, I think.
Yeah.
42 points. So there's no question that the offensive firepower is there. There totally is. Saskatchewan's defense is much more capable than BC's. So just an interesting thing to keep in mind.
I mean, even though you say 4-7, listen, we all know up to this point, anyone can beat anyone in this league. So, I mean, it's even possible that they can do better than 4-7. Because, I mean, other than Hamilton, other than Montreal and Toronto at the very last game of the season, you guys play the rest of the season against West teams. That will be the make it or break it of the season.
Absolutely.
Well, and generally, you would think that Winnipeg back-to-back is unobtainable for wins, right? And besides that Montreal game, everything else up until really the Toronto game, I guess. Like you're looking at the schedule, this team can potentially win, 6 to 7 of these. Like they could potentially go to 500 for the season. So it's funny. As soon as this team gets one win, and if it's in convincing fashion, which it was against Saskatchewan, which is a team that technically probably shouldn't have lost that game. Trey Ford having that run and scramble, having the running gun football, his play style, just it opened it up. So with that win, like you said, now all of a sudden you're going to have film after 2 to 3 weeks. There's going to be film on Trey Ford. Teams are going to start figuring it out. That Montreal game, you would normally say that August 25th at Montreal, that game is a scheduled loss for the Edmonton Elks. But if they're on a 2 to 3 game heater, once again, they could potentially go 4-7.
I mean, you look at the heater that the Alouettes went on last year. I mean, look at that. And so that's a great example of a team who had seemed like they were kind of in a little bit of the mediocrity and just exploded out of that. And they rode that and they won the Grey Cup just like that. And so one thing that I think is important here, if we're looking at because the thing is, when we're looking at this team, we're seeing obviously the 0-7 start. Not great. Right. They finally get that win. Now, when they first fire Chris Jones and Javaris Jackson goes in and he's the interim head coach, might be a full-time head coach, who knows? This is just more of, if it works, then maybe we roll with it. If it doesn't work, then at that point you look. Now, there was a lot of people who I remember in our comment section right after he got fired are like, oh, they just got rid of Chris Jones. They're finally going to win it. It's like, you can't. No. You don't understand. Like, a coaching change, that takes time to really, really kind of enforce. And so I think once Javaris Jackson kind of saw the writing on the wall, okay, like Chris Jones just got canned. Everyone was really, really mad that we got Bethel Thompson when we already had Trey Ford. We're trying this Bethel Thompson experiment. It's not working. We got to give Trey Ford a shot, and he goes and gets the win. It's one of those things where it's like he needs to take this team in a new direction. This was a team that was starving for a new direction, for something. And again, it's not lack of talent. It's just, to me, it seemed like lack of direction. And so I think that now he's kind of got this team going in a direction of his own, which he should. He's like, even though Chris Jones started the season, he's got to realize right now he is the head coach. He's the guy calling the shots. So whatever the guy did before, maybe there's some stuff that seemed great that you keep around, but if there's some stuff that doesn't fit with his vision of the Edmonton Elks, out with it and move on. You got to roll with that and see where you're able to go. And so him being able to get that win finally is, in my opinion, a pretty big deal. And this is pretty much right around where I expected it in terms of from when Chris Jones got fired to when the Elks are properly now adjusting to this new head coach and his vision for the team. And so I think it'll be interesting because I think now moving forward, this is the Trey Ford, Javarius Jackson Edmonton Elks. How is that going to go?
Well, and see, the way that I like to try to describe this is you look at coaching changes in both the NHL and the CFL. You also take a look at goaltender changes. Goaltending changes are one of my favorite things because it completely changes the complexion of whatever team is in front of it.
Yep.
The same goes for quarterback. If you have faith in the guy back there, then you can go do your job. So with a coaching change, it takes a couple games. So you take a look at the Edmonton Oilers. You take a look at their losing streak to start the season. They did a coaching change. They kind of went up and down, and then all of a sudden they went on like the 16-game or 18-game winning streak or whatever.
It was something
right?
ridiculous.
Exactly, but it wasn't instant. But you take a look at what they've done with Trey Ford now. Well, they put in Trey Ford for like 2 plays there 2 games ago or 2 or 3 games ago. They put in Trey Ford for a couple drives, failed drives, rusty quarterback, didn't look comfortable in the scenario, whatever.
That was the Ottawa game, right?
It was the Ottawa game.
I mean, listen, no offense, that was the most boring game of football I've ever watched. Me and Rick,
it was horrible.
Me and Rick live streamed that, and it was just like the whole game was just,
Well, and especially too, like the worst part about that game is you were like after you watch the Edmonton Elks lose to Ottawa at home, you're like, oh dear God, this team's about to lose to them again, and you knew it was coming. So they did the Chris Jones gets fired. It's a short week at that. MBT's running his mouth about short weeks and getting fined and all this other stuff. And
it's funny. I understand that, but to be fair, that's also not exclusive to the CFL. That like every league has that.
It's not exclusive to your team either. There's other teams that have to go through this short week, right? Like,
well, Ottawa did too. It's against the same team.
That's it. And you didn't see, what did Ottawa say? Well, I guess we're gonna try to beat them again.
I mean, to be fair, we went on a 4-day break and then we shut out BC 25-0. So.
See, I mean, hey, for some teams it works. The short week, obviously for MBT and company, it didn't work. But getting back to it, Trey Ford after that second Ottawa game, he goes in garbage time and makes magic happen. Yeah. And that would be like, okay, we got this new rookie goaltender. We're gonna play him in the third period here and see if he can stop every shot. And the guy stops like.
Okay, so shots. Jordan Binnington in the 2019 St. Louis Blues.
Exactly. And
that's what I'm hearing when you say that. Like, because who the hell was Jordan Binnington before that? Seriously.
Exactly. Like, I mean, obviously this scenario is a little bit different because not even because of the football scenario, but because Trey Ford had been there again so many times. Yep. This is, his third crack at being a starter.
The idea of bringing in a new face to at least, like, it's funny. He wasn't a new face to the team, but a new face to the team on the field that season because they hadn't used him really. And then seeing where that went.
Changes the team, right? It changes the team, and all of a sudden this team, like I said, believes in the guy behind them. He's going to get the job done. And it's weird because MBT can do all these things, but the team responds differently to Trey Ford.
They got to buy in.
They buy into Trey. They bought a Ford. They're buying Chevys. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Rick, you got anything?
So my interesting take is on this whole CFL season is it started offense heavy at the beginning. Then you've seen the slow decline halfway. Now you're seeing defense and kickers.
Yep.
Do you think we eventually go up again with offenses across the league, or is this like the peak of where we are, where it's like mostly defense and kicking now?
Well, as you get towards the ass end of the season, right? It's when you make your way through the film and you get all of your intel in on all of the other teams. The number one thing you're changing here is, I mean, you're changing.
Want to know when I think this changes? Labor Day. You're getting 2 Labor Day games, and you're getting the Battle of Alberta. I think that's when it changes.
Labor Day, right? And Labor Day, I think what's really cool about this season is Labor Day is shipping up to be one of the most important in like CFL
Oh
history.
yeah, it's a very big deal in terms of that. Like, I mean, Hamilton and Toronto aren't just fighting in a game; they are fighting for a playoff spot. In terms of that, like those are the two teams in that battle for that third spot. Just as it looks like at this point, unless Ottawa has seemingly a heart attack, they have that second spot probably locked up. Montreal doesn't seem like they're dropping out of first in the East. But then in the West side of things, it is a wild card in the sense of that BC and Saskatchewan have started the season hot, but BC completely fell apart last game, and Saskatchewan gave Edmonton their first win, and which you could argue that was a bit of a fall apart by them too in a game that they really should have won. It just didn't happen, and so it's one of those things where the West has opened up now with Winnipeg finally kind of stepping back into the picture with receivers that hold on to the ball, and Sergio Castillo playing out of his mind he first off gets the second longest kick in CFL history, then ties it later that season, Bombers franchise record, and he is now the first kicker in CFL history to ever get 2 kicks 60 yards or more. Ever. Yep. The first one to get 2, which is just ridiculous. And so I'm losing my mind about that, and our team's defense is finally doing good. So if it's defense and kicking, this football is boring, but I'm all for it because my team is doing well in that. But I do think Labor Day really is what's going to change that. And I'm always excited. I'm driving down to Saskatchewan for Labor Day between Winnipeg and Saskatchewan. I'll be back here seeing the Banjo Bowl, season ticket holder, so always got to see those games in Winnipeg. But between Edmonton and Calgary, this should be an interesting one because Calgary's in this weird spot where they're in third in the West, but they're in a bit of a precarious situation as they're a few points ahead of Winnipeg. However, Winnipeg is on the rise. Calgary needs to be worried about tying with Winnipeg because Winnipeg has the tiebreaker. And so it seems like that's going to be a very important thing as of right now. And so they have that. However, now with Edmonton, if Edmonton's able to pick up a few wins here, they could be knocking on the doorstep if they're able to string those together and get themselves back into the picture. And then at that point, like it's getting to a point where, if Toronto continues to fall, because right now it's not looking great in Toronto. If Chad Kelly comes back, that changes the whole ordeal. But I mean, there's no guarantees about any of that.
He's coming back. He's coming.
Like he's most likely coming back, but the when and the how long does it take to him actually adjust coming in halfway through the season? I mean, to be fair, he came in partway through a Grey Cup game, and he did pretty well for them during that. Trust me, I remember. And so it's one of those things where Toronto is such a wild card with all the circumstances there. And with Hamilton, you have a guy leading the league in passing yards and the team leading the league in every other category that you don't want. And so this season is crazy. Like it's so hard to predict. There's so much happening, which is why I'm below 500 on my pick'ems, because it's one of those things where week 1, I thought I took all the safe picks and I ended up 1-3, and I'm like, okay, well, this is just out the window.
So Scout, I have a question for you. My question is, what the F is going on with Boris Beatty?
It's really weird, and it's not like it's a consistency thing because it's 2 to 3 games in a row where he'll just completely flop. And I don't know if it's the chip balls. I don't know if they're using the chip balls.
Well, no, they're not, because here's the thing: the chip balls stopped after the first game of the season when Castillo went out and he mentioned it.
But it's up to the kicker if they want to use them or not.
Yes, Rick is right.
That's true. But here's the thing: if you're missing kicks, then what? Pardon my French here. Why the fuck would you use it then?
Well, and here's the thing too. Like that's the only explanation for me for Boris Beatty missing like 30-yard.
Boris, you don't want the stats if you're missing them. Like you don't want the aerodynamics if the aerodynamics are wide right. Like
Well, and I think the other problem too is there's so much pressure in Edmonton. The pressure has been somewhat alleviated.
No, that's true. That's very true.
Now you need a home win. So in those home win scenarios, like even that one squib kick, I think was that Ottawa? Was it? I want to say it was Ottawa, but just an absolute call for a kick. Absolutely horrible call for a kick. Instead of trying to go for the Rouge, which that's a coaching call. You could have went for the Rouge.
That would be us, my friend. That's the one that cost Paul Boudreau his job.
Exactly. You know how it goes. Like, it just you can't do that. You cannot do that. And like Chris Jones, I don't know if Chris Jones made that call. I don't know who made that call specifically, but you can't do that. Yeah, that was
I mean, no matter who made that call, at the end of the day, Chris Jones is the head coach at the time. So even if he didn't make the call, he can't there's some responsibility on those shoulders. So,
Totally. Yeah, no, you can't do that. So, but Boris Beatty, getting back to him specifically, it's a horrible season for him, and I don't know why. He is getting better. He is coming around, but I think that the pressure in Edmonton has a little bit to do with that, because when you're playing under pressure like that, the small little things become massive things. And just like MBT, struggling and then deflecting with media and kind of going through some of his motions and, not finding that success, Trey Ford comes in without pressure. And in multiple scenarios without pressure, he does fine. But when they put him in for those first two snaps, he had the world on his shoulders. They got that out of the way in two drives, got it out of the way early. The next game, Trey Ford then had a very low pressure, garbage time succeeded. They set him up for success in that scenario. So you see exactly how badly the pressure cooker affects some of these players, which in all affects the whole team, right? I think that's what it would be. Because lately he's been a lot better.
Yeah.
Let me look up Beatty stats.
That's true.
So Beatty is 13 for 18 for field goals, 72.2%. Longest is 52, 2 singles, but then he's 15 for 15 for extra points.
Yeah, but I mean, extra points.
Well, we don't have anyone missing conversions this year. That's good.
Hey, wait.
Good God, it was like 2 years ago. It was like every team had to miss at least a few. Like I remember when we were playing Toronto and Boris Beatty missed a conversion, and that's how we won the game.
Listen. Castillo has missed one. David Cote's missed one. Larham has missed 2. Lewis Ward has
60.
missed 1, and
from 60.
Rene Paredes has missed 1. So,
well,
really?
Yes.
This season?
Yes.
Well, Boris Beatty's missing the 3-pointers and hitting the ones, so I mean, take that as you will.
Unreal. Okay, so there you go. So we can't complain about it too much, but the problem is with this team in their losses this season, it's the critical moments. When you have those type of failures at critical moments, such as Boris Beatty basically blowing a whole game, 8 points off the board. You can't leave 8 points off the board. And that 8 points would have won them the football game. Like, it was the biggest talk of it. It's like, how do you screw that up? With this team, if it's not the offense or the defense, it's the special teams that fails you. If it's not special teams or defense, it's offense. So it rolls in that like nasty fire.
It just rotates when it's like when one part of the team's on, the other part's off, and that's
it.
It's the same thing with our team. People will blame Bo. Well, you can't blame Bo because look at Bo's numbers. Then you blame Mark Washington in the defense. Then it's the special teams. It's like you can't.
Well, that was the thing. A big problem with Winnipeg at the start of the season was I was like, man, I do not know how I feel about Jordan Young with this defense. And I was like, yeah, but you know what? I'm going to give it a little bit of time because he doesn't look good right now. However, the whole team doesn't look good. So, I mean, I don't really see how good relatively he's doing if everybody sucks. Then the team starts doing decent and he's kind of at the spear front of that. And I'm like, okay, you know what? I could get behind this. Got a shutout. I ain't questioning that defense anymore. And so
No,
it just shows how it can change at the dime. I mean, we were talking just like 10, 20 minutes ago about how this season started with all offense. And now it's just friggin' field goals and defense. And that Labor Day, everyone's going to want to kill each other again, and people are actually going to start playing offense. So
That's football.
That is football.
In Hamilton, as long as we beat the Argos on Labor Day, we don't care what happens to our season. We just care about that Labor Day because we now have won. That'll be 2 games, so we've won the season series.
Yeah.
And then if it comes down to that one game, we're gonna have the season series, and that could make the difference between teams making the playoffs and not making the playoffs.
It technically could. Like, every rivalry series will be for major points and major standings. Like, it's going to be a really, really exciting Labor Day and rematch weekends. Like, I can't wait. And then we all know, as CFL fans, that's when the season starts.
Because, I mean, especially since, again, we have Hamilton and Toronto fighting over that third spot in the East. Calgary and Edmonton fighting over either the third spot in the West or a chance to cross over to the East and take something there. And then between Winnipeg and Saskatchewan, you got bitter rivals against each other, with Saskatchewan trying to either hold second or advance to first in the West, and Winnipeg trying to get their season back together so that way they can hopefully either kick Calgary out of the playoffs or over to the East. But who knows if that happens, because Edmonton's now getting thrown into the mix. So it's just everything is all over the place. And I'm not going to lie, I think this is maybe where we lead it off. Is there anything else we got here, Rick?
The only thing that I was going to ask Scout was, what is his overall grade?
Like a letter grade.
A letter grade on the season so far.
It would have been an F if
compared to expectations. That's where we're going to put it, though.
Yeah.
Oh, compared to expectations, I would say that we're at an F right now. I would even say an F minus compared to expectations, because I think we expected at least one home win right now and a heck of a lot more than one win in general. So the team has definitely failed expectations as a whole.
I think you should raise it at an F, though, because you were able to get that win, and at least the trend now. So.
Well, and we have Trey Ford in there, which is a positive. So I would say
so maybe D.
It's a D. It's a hard D. No plus, no minus. It's a hard D right now. Yeah. As far as expectations compared to the beginning of the season coming in with MBT, yeah, I mean, I would say that's an F there. But looking at it right now, what's the overall grade? It's definitely a D because we got that win.
I think I'd probably agree with that as well. What about you, Rick?
I mean, there's some bright spots. I mean, let's be honest. I'm gonna jump on that wagon that if MBT didn't start all those games, you guys would have had more wins. I don't care what anyone says, but I'm jumping on that bandwagon.
Oh no, I know. I agree with that too. Well, that's the thing though. That's only one part of the equation, because then again, there's also the Javarius Jackson with Chris Jones, and I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna lie. I've been of the idea that Chris Jones should have been gone years ago. You know, like at least before the start of this season, but.
Like, I mean, you could have said the same thing against us against Saskatchewan week 2. We lost by 3. We could have won that game. Week 4, we lost to Ottawa by 2 points. We could have won that game. Like, and then it would be a whole different season.
And it looked concerning for Edmonton. And I've quoted him numerous times on our show. Rick knows the Milt Stegall quote I'm about to mention. And it seemed very concerning because Milt Stegall had said, when in regards to the Edmonton Elks, this was I think this was right before Chris Jones got fired. And he said, man, the Elks, they're not improving. They're just finding new ways to lose. And that's kind of like, that looked accurate at that point in time, in the sense of that they were getting these close games, but close means nothing if you can't win them. So like,
means nothing in football. And food for thought on the Trey Ford starting debate, because yes, I do think that Trey Ford should have started sooner, but MBT coming in gave Trey Ford actual time to develop, which he hasn't had this whole time. He's been trying to develop behind a Taylor Cornelius who's going through his own motion behind a broken O-line. So Trey Ford coming in at this time, that's probably best for Trey Ford's development. It's also probably better for the team. However, if he comes in too early, then you're going to shatter his confidence too. Or
That's true.
maybe he's not quite ready at that point, even if it's, talking 2 to 3 games back. So, yes, I mean, Hamilton, I think he should have started against Hamilton in that game where he came in for garbage time 3 touchdowns. He likes playing against Hamilton. Trey Ford should have started sooner for sure. But people saying that he should have started from game 1, yes, it's.
Well, I just wouldn't have signed Bethel Thompson.
That's it, right? Like
because the people saying that Trey Ford should have started game 1 aren't really saying that he should have started over Bethel Thompson. I think it's more of that Bethel Thompson never would have even been signed. So
well, and at least you would put that money towards the O line, or you would put that
the O line or the D line or somewhere else. Somewhere filling a need.
Linebackers, like anywhere other than a quarterback, which you already kind of named. Like you named Trey Ford at the end of 2023 season. You name him the starter. So to yank that away from him, it's demoralizing. Sure. The one thing I will say though, MBT, at least Trey Ford is getting that elite Michael Riley type of quarterback training.
That Michael Riley going on Nathan Rourke and
That's exactly that's what Trey Ford has needed all along, because even when you have G. Roy Simon, G. Roy Simon knows a quarterback or two. Jarius Jackson knows a quarterback. He is one. So when you have those types coming out saying that Trey Ford needs development and needs to learn how to do those in between elite things, how to show up on time, how to stay in the building until 5 or 6 o'clock reading film or watching film and reading notes and this and that. That's the pieces that Trey Ford was missing. I think he's got it now.
Yep.
But you don't need to spend $500,000 to do that.
Agreed.
I mean, what you guys are spending on your quarterback is just a little bit more. I think we're at like $600,000 to $700,000 for our whole offensive line. Like our starting line, each player is making at least 6 figures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's. I mean, then in the offensive line, sometimes they get some big money on that line too, right? Sometimes centers get big money. But when you have almost $1 million tied up between a wide receiver and a quarterback, at least one of those things has to perform. And luckily now one of them is. And MBT, real quick before we jump off here, but MBT was not the problem with this team for the first 7 games or 6 games, sorry. He wasn't necessarily the problem with the team, but at
buy-in was the biggest problem in my opinion.
Buy-in, but at some point you just start shattering somebody's confidence and they're never going to perform the way you want. It's just like Taylor Cornelius. It's this offensive line has not really protected the quarterback. They have had great games and great moments, but if you do not get that offensive line help, the proper help that they actually need, such as an extra veteran, or just some form of improvement, maybe a better coach, whatever. It's that when you spend so much money on those 2 pieces and you don't put any of that money elsewhere, or you don't have any money left to improve something that's been broken from a year or 2 previous, it's called insanity. Expecting a different result out of the same thing.
Yep.
You can't do that.
Absolutely. I think. Is there anything else we got? Because I think we have pretty much covered all the bases and more. We got a lot of good stuff here.
What's your game predictions for this weekend, boys?
Oh, so I have them written down here. Rick, you had something?
No, I was gonna say. So I have Ottawa, Calgary, Hamilton, and Edmonton. Carter has Ottawa, Calgary, Montreal, Edmonton.
Yep.
Let me get my. Well, I'm saying Edmonton this weekend. Let me get that full. I'm just pulling it up.
Ottawa, Calgary, Montreal, Edmonton. That's mine. Yeah.
I got Ottawa. Ottawa, Argos, Alouettes, and
Edmonton. So you got the same as Rick's.
Yeah.
Or no, you don't. No, you don't.
No, because he has Montreal. He has Toronto.
Oh,
See,
yeah, okay.
My team. The way I look at it is, I'm a diehard Ticat fan. live and die on my team, regardless if I know they're gonna lose. I don't
I live
care.
and die on
I'm
my
picking-
team, but I also live on planet Earth, and I know when my team sucks. And sometimes
Listen.
me telling them that they're gonna lose gives them the motivation to go out and win. So you know what?
Listen, there's always that time when Winnipeg beats BC and Edmonton beats Saskatchewan, and we're gonna beat a team that people.
Well, there's also that time where Winnipeg beats Hamilton in the Grey Cup.
Just don't be the guy drinking out of the Grey Cup and you're good.
Oh yeah, don't even get me started on that, Paul. Like, how do you do that 20 seconds before the end of a game?
Don't do it.
That's wild. Alrighty. Well, I think we're probably going to wrap this up. So overall, a lot of good stuff here. My goodness. So how can people reach you? Just because I want to have some links in the description below. I'll definitely have a link to the Elks Herd Instagram in the description below. Is there any other links that I should have in there?
Yeah, so on most social media platforms, including TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, X, we are at the Elks Herd. You can also find us on our website, which is shotgunsportsnetwork.ca. That's our media website. So we cover a lot of great things, such as the IFAF, the recent IFAF World Cup, the U20 World Championship. So
there you go.
If you guys want to check us out there, by all means. And then we also do have on YouTube, Shotgun Sports Network. If you search us up there, you will find all of our latest video media.
Well, I'll have links to as many of those as I can in the description below. And yeah, make sure you guys check that out. Give him some subscribes and some follows on all those platforms. I'm sure he would probably really appreciate that. Make sure you leave a like on this video. You probably should have. There's a lot to like on this video. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, because if you don't, that'll make me sad, and I don't like that. And make sure you hit the little notification bell so that way, whenever we release content, you see it. So that way you can lose the brain cells that we lost 10 years ago. So I think that's pretty much all that we got on this episode of Crazy Shit and talking about Elks 2 and LA Extreme cameo that I wasn't ready for, or name drop. And make sure you guys have a wonderful day. Peace, love, and positivity to all of you wonderful people. And till next time.